and welcome back to my channel for this video, which is going to be the big 10,000 subscriber celebratory Q&A session, which I know at least 4 of you have been looking forward to. So hopefully this will be enjoyable for you, and I think it's only right that I start off by saying thank you so much for 10,000 subscribers. It feels like a really significant milestone to me, because anyone who does social media, YouTube or whatever will know that often growth is very slow, and the amount of time that you put into the content that you make doesn't necessarily equate to getting things in return. And I finally feel like I'm getting some momentum now, and I'm getting a little bit better at doing this whole thing. My workflow is a lot less convoluted than it was when I started. I thought this would just be a fun and chilled out way for you to get to know me a little bit better, for me to answer some questions that I've gathered from comment sections and a community tab post that I made a while ago. So we're just going to go through and answer them, which is the general way that a Q&A works. But in order to make this a little bit more me friendly, I am also going to be crafting while I speak, because I find that I can actually speak a lot freer when I'm doing something with my hands. Often the multitasking actually helps me get my points out. And I've got this thing that I've been working on for a while. It's just a really long woolen kind of paper chain thing that I started putting together for no particular reason, but I'm thinking it will be a cute decoration at Christmas or for parties or something. It's just a thing that I'm doing. I had this big patchwork woolen blanket which I got from a charity shop for literally £1. Nobody else seemed to want it. I kept going back to that same shop over the course of a couple of weeks and it didn't sell, so I ended up buying it, but I didn't actually need it as a blanket, and also quite a lot of the patches were a little bit warped and torn, so I figured I would use it for something else, and this is that something that it's ended up being. I've just been cutting the squares into strips, rolling them into sausages, stitching them together crudely and adding them to the chain. So I'm going to be doing that while we talk, and hopefully I will be able to answer at least some of these questions sufficiently. I must admit I'm a little bit anxious about doing this, only because I can never really gauge the amount of information that I should give away on the internet, with personal safety and an obvious need for a level of privacy in mind. But the questions I've got aren't particularly intrusive, and obviously I can choose to answer what I'm going to answer and avoid what I'm not. But hopefully regardless, you will learn some things today, you'll hear some stories, you'll watch some half-assed crafting. And actually I do want to start off this video talking about a little anecdote which nobody actually has asked me about specifically, but it's related to the community tab post that I made when I hit 10,000 subscribers. I just put a quick post up with a picture of myself from 2014, 2015, I can't remember what year I found out it was from, with a really terrible haircut that I had, because I thought you all deserved a laugh in these dark times. And actually I saw quite a few people respond to that post with positive comments on the haircut, which was very kind of you. I think when you're being self-deprecating, it is always welcome when somebody clocks you and reminds you that things aren't all that bad. But yeah, I think maybe the picture I posted was a little bit deceptive as to just how bad this haircut was, and I probably subconsciously picked that photo for that reason, because I didn't want to out myself too much. But I'll put a few other pictures of this haircut up on screen while I talk. Thankfully for my ego, not many photos of me at this time exist. But yeah, this was the true state of things, and I just wanted to tell you the story of me getting this haircut because I think it's quite funny. I just checked and I had this haircut in 2014, which makes sense because that is the year that I graduated from art school and moved down to London. At the time I was in the process of growing out a kind of pixie cut. I'm not quite sure what stage it was at. I'd had this like pixie cut for the last year or two of uni, and I would say I was ready for a change. So that's me saying I was susceptible to making potentially a rash decision, and I was looking for a job in basically any place with my shiny fresh art degree in hand. I did start by looking at specifically arts kind of jobs, but quickly realised that even in London not a huge amount of those exist, and they are highly competitive, and I seem to not have the necessary requirements for even entry-level positions in that. So then I was just looking at kind of retail jobs, and I actually went to Brick Lane one day and I was wandering around handing out CVs, and I was in a vintage shop and a woman approached me and asked me if if I wanted a free haircut. And obviously, new to London, new expensive rent, unemployed at the time, wanting a haircut, I jumped at the chance. And she said that it was for this award-winning salon in Camden and that my hair would be cut by the senior stylist or something. She really sold it to me, and she explained that the reason it was free is because it was a hair modelling gig and it would be part of a teaching experience in the salon, so there would be other people watching me get my hair cut, which didn't really bother me at all. So I said yes, and we booked in for me to go into this salon. I went to this appointment and it was indeed a very swanky salon, and the hairdresser was really nice and kind of explained the process a bit more to me. He told me that the hair modelling was for an Italian group of students, so I would be getting my hair cut, he would be talking through the haircut, and then there would be a translator in the room translating the whole thing into Italian, which did sound interesting to me, and again wasn't really a problem. The problem came from my inability to assert myself effectively and not just let my social awkwardness force me into being like a people pleaser. So he said that this was like a creative cut, and was I comfortable with something a little bit unusual, and I don't remember exactly how he explained it or how in-depth he explained it, and I'm not blaming him for this. Like I said, it was very much me not being able to say no. I felt like I was in too deep at this point, so I just had to let him do whatever it was that he wanted to do, and I agreed to this cut. Went into the room, and indeed there was a whole class of maybe like 15 Italian hairdressers sat in rows in front of this one hairdressing chair. I was on the chair facing them, so the mirror and the hairdresser were behind me, so I couldn't see at any point what was happening. The whole thing was being translated into Italian, and as it was happening, the more hair that was coming off, the shaving that was being done, I was just getting increasingly concerned about how this was going to turn out, and I didn't see it until the point where the class had finished and I was spun around in my chair to look at it, and I have to admit it was a shock. Both sides here were shaved. It was cut quite short round the sides, and then it had a little kind of straight cut mullet at the back. Then the top, like the crown, was cut really short, so it stuck out kind of like a 2006 emo haircut, and then the fringe was cut basically right to the hairline on one side, down into the center and up in a triangle on my forehead. So there wasn't a single angle that you could look at this haircut where it didn't look very bizarre and intense. And actually I do agree with some of the people in the comments saying that it is like a cool haircut, and I think on many people I would agree. The problem wasn't really with the haircut, it was with how I wore it, because to style out a haircut like that you kind of have to have a similarly punky, cyborgy aesthetic to make the whole thing cohesive. But I dressed then not dissimilarly to how I dress now. That is quite raggedy with a heavy emphasis on knitwear, and the combo of that style, my quite round baby face, and that haircut was just interesting. It was a moment, it was a period in my life, and I should say I was never annoyed or upset about it at the time. I've never been particularly precious about my hair, and even though I would say this is definitely the worst haircut I've had many other terrible haircuts, many other terrible hair days, and seldom do I care. I just found it quite funny that I got myself into this situation, and I styled it out as best I could and just kept chopping it down to other short haircuts until all of the weird uneven lengths finally leveled out, which took years it feels like. But again, that's not a huge deal. The only thing injured was my vanity. But in concrete terms, it did actually also prove a problem, because like I said, at the time I was pretty desperately looking for a job, and I know employers aren't supposed to discriminate, but I'm certain that when I walked into places with that haircut, some employers would have ruled me out immediately. And I actually ended up realising that because it was Camden that had made me look like that, it would probably have to be Camden that employed me looking like that, and I ended up getting a job in a vintage shop on Camden High Street because nowhere else wanted me and my weird ass cyborg haircut. So there you go, there's the first answer to the first question that nobody asked. And now let's get on to a question that somebody actually has asked, which leads on actually quite well from that last one, because it is about my employment history. I'd mentioned in a previous video that I've had lots of different jobs in my life, and somebody had asked me to expand on that, so here we go. I got my first job when I was 16. I worked in MK1. Do any of my UK high street girlies remember MK1? It was like a shitter version of New Look. That is quite a basic low-end high street clothing shop, and I actually worked there for 3 years until I was 19 and left for uni. And in that time, I think it went into liquidation twice or 3 times, and at one point it changed from MK1 to Mark 1. This is a period of the MK1 law that most people don't remember because it didn't last long, and then it changed into International, which is a very funny name, and it stayed like that until I left when I was 19, like I said. And actually I took voluntary redundancy when I lost that job, because by the time I was leaving, International was not doing so well yet again, and I'd been there 3 years, and at my contracted hours for my original contract, which was just to do 1 day a week, and based on the length of time that I'd been there, my redundancy payout was £75, which I mean I took happily because I was leaving anyway. So yeah, that was my first job. And then other jobs I've had: when I was at uni, I did some waitressing, and I was really terrible at that. I'm quite clumsy, I'm not very personable, and I'm vegan, so working at a somewhat fancy fish meat restaurant was not my forte, and people would often ask me for recommendations of things on the menu, and I couldn't eat a single thing, so I just used to make something up every time. I also once accidentally stabbed myself on a customer's steak knife while I was pouring them some wine and bled onto their steak. Then I quit that job in a massive shouting argument with the chef at the start of a Saturday evening shift, which was quite fun. I also worked in a sandwich shop, which kind of specialised in full English breakfasts in a BAP type thing. Don't have much to say about that other than I hated it, and it put me off cooked breakfasts for a long time. Like I was saying before, my first job in London was at a vintage clothing shop in Camden, and I ended up working there for a few years altogether, although I did leave at one point for one job and then go back. So that job was mainly just a shitty retail job. Obviously Camden is a very busy and often very touristy area, so that was consistently quite annoying. We used to get 30 minutes for our lunch break, and if you didn't bring food with you and you had to go out to get food and get back, with the crowds you could basically just about inhale your food within the 30 minutes and get back to work. And I have a lot of bad things to say about this place, but to be honest, those all pale in comparison to the good thing that came from that job, which is that I met some of my closest, dearest, most amazing lifelong future friends in that job. There's something about being a group of emotionally and financially messy early 20-year-olds all working in the same dead-end shit job that really does bond you, and I have many fond memories of working there just because of the people. Then the worst job I've ever had, which was the job that I left that job for and then left that job and went back to the vintage shop, was a job in marketing. And the funny thing about this job is that I really thought that it was my big break, which in hindsight is so laughable because I've never been more miserable in my life than when I worked there. But when I got the job, I really thought that I was finally starting a career in a traditional sense, because it was a marketing job, but it was for an art adjacent company which purported to hire a lot of artists and support a lot of artists. So I thought it would be a great place to work, and I got this entry-level graduate job there, which was so crazy competitive to get to begin with. It was like 3 or 4 rounds of interviews, the first of which was a group interview of 10 people. Then we were like whittled down. The communication was awful and the pay was fucking shit, and I lasted a year, and that was only because I was determined to get a year of it on my CV. If I'd been able to, I probably would have left after 2 months because it was so ridiculously miserable. It was one of those jobs where they give you way too much responsibility for your pay grade, way too many things to do that are feasible to do within a realistic time frame, and then they stab you in the back when you inevitably struggle or fail. And it had a real culture of bullying, I would say, towards junior members of staff. I'm obviously not going to say the names of any of these places, but yeah, that one particularly shit. And like I said, I lasted a year. Just realising I've already been talking for ages and I'm only on the first proper question, so let me quick fire other jobs. After that marketing job, I went back to the vintage shop, and then I started doing marketing, copywriting, web stuff for that company. company. I left there eventually and I ended up actually starting a Depop business, which was my first foray into self-employment, and it wasn't very successful because I wasn't super passionate about what I was doing. I more just thought it made sense of a thing to do because I had all of this knowledge now on vintage clothing and whatnot. Did that for a while, then I ended up getting a job at a streetwear brand doing web stuff, which I'm not really going to go into too much, and that was my last job in London. Then when I moved down here, it was notably February 2020, just before the first lockdown, and I hadn't had a job lined up, so I ended up getting a very depressing job, which was a temp job working for the DWP processing universal credit claims. If I wasn't already a socialist, that job would have made me one. I lasted 6 months there before I had a meltdown one day and quit because it was all just too depressing and too stressful. And then I got the job at the place where I currently work, which is a charity for homeless people, and I worked there full time for 2 years until I left to start my YouTube, and now I'm back working there part time. I feel like I've missed some jobs, but that's the main rundown of my CV. Sorry if that answer was way too detailed. I'm going to try and be speedier with some of these other ones and also hopefully clean this up in editing. Next question is, how did I end up in the town I live now? Not going to say the name of the town just for privacy reasons, but I'd mentioned in an earlier video that I moved here not knowing the place and not knowing anyone. So somebody asked, how did that happen? And I would say that this was just me following a classic trend in my life, which is to be incredibly risk averse and overly anxious when it comes to the majority of minor decisions in my life, and then incredibly flippant and brazen on occasion when something intuitively inside of me tells me I need change, and I make decisions very quickly. The town that I live is somewhere that my friend suggested I look at because she knew that I wanted to leave London and I was looking to buy somewhere to live, which would have priced me out of London anyway, but she'd heard about this place from one of her friends. I had a little look, I liked the look of it, and I moved here. That's kind of the short version. When I've talked about this with people, some people have said, oh, you're very brave to move somewhere alone where you don't know anyone, and I can't say I ever really thought about it that as a negative. I'm someone who really does enjoy my own company, and I liked the idea of a fresh, anonymous start in a place where I don't have any kind of life or background story. When I was looking to leave London, I did for a short while consider moving back up to the Midlands because I did my degree in Leicester and I really loved living there. It's such a beautiful city, but something about having history in that place made me not want to go back. It felt like I was moving in the wrong direction. Ever since I left my hometown, which I feel like I might as well say, I grew up in Gloucester, which is in southwest England, kind of near Bristol. I did see someone in one of my comment sections once clocking that I had a slightly Bristolian accent, which I thought was interesting because I don't see myself as having any kind of strong accent, but whoever you are, you clocked me. And yeah, I grew up in Gloucester, and ever since I left there age 19, it's never felt like an option to me to move back there. I've always felt like the life that I had there wasn't a life that I lived for myself, and that I wasn't really ever able to be myself there, so I couldn't go back there and didn't know where else to go, so I ended up here. And thankfully for me, despite not knowing a single soul when I moved, I've met some really wonderful, lovely people since I've come down here, foremost of which being my partner, who is an absolute gem. Obviously, another big reason why I chose this place, which leads into the next question, is did I buy my flat? Yes, I did. So house prices were also a big factor in my decision making. Since moving, I have done a lot more reading into kind of local issues, obviously. Have become aware with local frustration around gentrification, people moving here from London and driving up house prices, and I can't help but feel like I have contributed to that, and that makes me feel a type of way, which I think can only be rectified by me trying to be a productive member member of the community, trying to be a help, not a hindrance. But yeah, that's something that people should look into. But it is also tricky when you're also limited by your own budget and you don't really have anywhere else to go that wouldn't be equally as damaging to another community. Like I said, I wasn't gonna move back to my hometown, which I guess would be the only non-problematic place to move in that sense. But throughout history, there's always been movement of people, and that's not a bad thing. I'm obviously pro-migration, pro-people having their own agency to live where they feel safe and comfortable. But yeah, part of the reason why I moved here is so that I could buy a property. And I also moved here because I fell in love specifically with this flat. I do want to say here as well, which I think is important to note, that when I bought the flat, I had a huge amount of help from a family member to do so. I am not a completely self-made, pull myself up by the bootstraps woman. As I'm sure you can tell from my little rundown of my employment history, I've never been somebody that was going to be a high earner in my jobs, in the degree that I chose to study, and also the way that I am. I just don't have high earner energy, and I never would have been able to afford any property if I hadn't had someone in my family who gave me money so that I could put down a deposit on a flat, for which I will be eternally grateful because it's changed my life and given me a level of security that I didn't think I would ever have. So yes, I bought the flat with help. And then the second part of that same person's question was, how did I see through the messiness and all the chaos when I looked around this flat, including those shit-coloured handprints that were on the walls? For me, this was easy. I feel like this flat has such beautiful bones. It was pretty simple to be able to see how amazing it could be with admittedly a lot of work, but I wasn't fazed at all by the prospect of doing work on the flat. In fact, that's what I wanted. I always have dreamed, since watching Sarah Beanie with my mum on a Friday night, I would one day have the opportunity to renovate a home. So when I was looking around here and I could see the handprints on the walls, or the crappy renter carpet, or the room that smelled like vomit, I just saw the potential for a lot of fun and opportunity to learn, to be honest with you. In terms of the architectural details that stood out to me in this flat, I would say mainly the thing that I was obsessed with and just kept going back to Zoopla over and over again to look at the photos of, was the ceilings in the front of the flat, bedroom, art room and living room, which has this kind of square detailing on it. I was so very excited about that. I just thought, oh, my childhood bedroom had like swirly popcorn ceiling, and I always dreamed of having beautiful high Victorian ceilings. So that for me really sold this flat. The other thing I would say is the built-in cupboards and shelving that some of the rooms had really excited me as well. The cupboards that are in the now kitchen, previously I don't know what the fuck it was room, they were just screaming out to be kitchen pantry cupboards to me. And yeah, the whole thing was just really exciting. I didn't go in with any trepidation, which I think was testament to me being completely naive and having never done anything like this before, and having no concept of the price or effort that things were going to take in order to fix. When eventually I move and start looking at doing a renovation project again in the future, I probably will be a little bit more hesitant with some things, because I have some sort of framework in mind now for the jobs that are easy that I can do myself, and also the areas that have the potential to be just complete money pits, and that I suppose might rule out some properties for me in the future. Although that being said, if I saw somewhere and it had a really amazing something, like if it had a beautiful stained glass front door, I could probably excuse and ignore a lot of issues in order for that payoff. So maybe I've not learned at all. Like I said, historically very flippant with big decisions. Moving house, quitting jobs, deciding on further education, these are seemingly things I do on a whim. And perhaps that doesn't need to change. Hope I answered that question. Let's move on to the next one. Someone asked me, what is my favourite project or art piece that I've done? And I'm guessing this means ever. And the only thing that really jumps out to me as something that I'm particularly proud of is a little bit depressingly long ago, because it is my final piece that I made for my university degree show. And I think that this jumps out to me mainly just because the amount of contextual work work and build up that goes into doing your final project. It really felt like the culmination of figuring out processes, working on concepts, and it was also a highly personal kind of piece which meant a lot to me. Also, it helped me get a first in my degree. And this piece was a large-scale sculpture which was loosely based on the shape of a bin, and I'd been doing this whole series of sculptures in my final year around the theme of bins, which tied back into my family history, and also I was relating to my personal struggles with bulimia, which is very convoluted to explain all this stuff in depth, but just for a bit of context. And I did, I think, 13 sculptures over the course of the year in varying sizes to varying degrees of success around these similar themes. And then my final piece was this big faux leather bin that was kind of blobby on the outside, and I made it all with hand sewn patches of the pleather that I sewed into this shape. The inside of the structure was this big welded metal thing that I welded myself. Very proud of that. Didn't set my hair alight once in the process of doing it, which I had done the year prior on a previous sculpture. This time there was no incident. And then yeah, it was all covered in padding and this pleather, and it had a really long big chunky zip running down the side of it, which you could unzip and get inside of and zip yourself in. And then you're kind of in a padded cell again with individually sewn patches, all of which were white except for one which was black, which tied back into this tiled piece that I'd done earlier in the year, which I actually still have in my bathroom. And it was displayed alongside a series of photographs of the other 13 sculptures that I'd made, which I'd taken out around Leicester and photographed in different places that had personal significance for me. So the whole thing felt like it just meshed, and it took very long to make. It was very cumbersome to move around, and I remain really proud of it. I'm actually annoyed that I don't have more photographs of it than I do. I think at the time I underestimated the importance of documenting your work. If you're at art school, document your work, because you don't know when you're going to want to call back to it in some way. Because this piece was so big, when I graduated I had no clue what to do with it. To this day I don't drive. I didn't have the means of getting it anywhere. There was actually a gallery in Leicester that wanted to show it, but I had no clue how to get it there. And as the half-assed little 21-year-old that I was, I just left it in my uni studio when I left the university, and I felt quite guilty about this, but I didn't have the heart to put it in the skip. And I'm glad now that I didn't, because about a year later I got an email from one of my old tutors who said that my sculpture was still in the art block, and that one of the technicians who worked at the university wanted to have it, which I obviously happily allowed them, because at that point it wasn't mine anymore. I mean, I'd basically fly tipped it there for over a year, and so some person who I don't know took it and has done whatever they have done with it. I don't know whether they took it down for parts or if they use it as a little sex dungeon. The latter I actually think it could be good for. So yeah, that is probably my favourite piece of art I've ever made. In terms of things that I've made on this channel that I'm most proud of, I actually think that that would be the window accessories that I made for my bedroom. I'm looking at them right now. I made this whole pelmet and matching set of tie backs, which I patchworked together from old vintage linens and then embroidered some writing on. And I don't know, I remain really proud of how those turned out, and I look at them every day in my bedroom, really pleased with it. And also in those they have kind of a personal significance to me about my gran, because I used some of her beads on the curtain tie backs, and I also put rest in peace on the pelmet. She'd passed away a year or so before I made those, and to this day I am grieving her, and so they make me think of her, which is always nice. Okay, next question. This video is going to be like 2 hours long if I don't hurry up. Someone said, what is tickling my creative brain at the moment? Themes, media, objects, art, patterns, colours, etc. That's a good question. I'm trying to think if anything really springs to mind as something that's different from normal, because I would say lots of the things that tickle me creatively are the same things that have tickled me creatively consistently. The only note I made when I wrote this question down was sadness, which is a bit I don't know, but it's true. I would say emotion always tickles me creatively, positive or negative, but particularly negative. I think my desire to create has often been driven by a desire to express negative things in my life as a way to process them. I don't want to over-intellectualize that, because also I do a lot of silly, frivolous things that have nothing to do with my mental state, but that's always been a theme that has been fruitful for my creative thinking. Lots of things that I make are referential to something, and I really like storytelling in my work, and I specifically like that in the context of making YouTube videos, because I think it makes for a better video when you're able to tell stories through the projects that you're making. And usually those things are things that have been brewing as ideas or thoughts for a long time. I'm really struggling to articulate my answer to this question. Media, objects, art, patterns, colours. I think I have too many kind of disparate ideas and thoughts and inspirations going around my head at any one moment to be able to verbalize it coherently. So I think what I'm going to do instead is make a little mood board on the screen while I'm editing this. So behold, themes and inspirations that are currently interesting to me. All around the screen now. One thing I will say in terms of shapes, I have always been, and I have mentioned this previously in a video, a boobar person over Kiki, and I'm always drawn to curved types of shapes. Sharp angles can be nice sometimes, but they're just not touchable in the same way, if that makes sense. Okay, next question. YouTubers that I watch. This is another difficult question because there are so many. YouTube is definitely my #1 form of watching media. I don't watch a lot of much else, and the things I watch on YouTube are many and varied, and I'll get sucked into intense interest in a specific topic for a while and then kind of get bored of that, and so I flip from different types of content to another quite quickly. I'm guessing whoever asked this is maybe interested in YouTubers I watch that do similar content, like home design or arty content. And the main person I can think of as somebody who's renovating their house online, whose YouTube videos I really enjoy, is Ariel Bissett. I'm sure lots of people watching will know who she is. She's wonderful. She's been renovating her house for a number of years now, and she's doing it really slowly and with a lot of care and consideration, and really leaning into her own design aesthetic in a way that I think you don't see super often. I feel like lots of design people do fall foul of trends more often than not, but she seems to be really solid in knowing what she likes, really comfortable to do things at her own pace and do them properly, and I think that her home is a really beautiful reflection of her. So in the off chance that you've not watched her before, I would highly recommend. In terms of big channels in this type of genre, I did used to watch a lot of Alexandra Gator and the Sorry Girls, though I haven't watched them as much recently. Caroline Winkler I think is really good. Have watched Lone Fox in the past. It's interesting because I used to watch a lot of home designy content before I started making my own content on my own channel, and I don't know why, but I watch a lot less of it now. I think part of me feels worried that I'm going to be influenced to do things that aren't very me, or maybe it's just like too much of a busman's holiday to watch people doing a similar thing to you. But lots of the content that I watch isn't really art or home related anymore. I have talked before about how I really like Lena Norm's content. I enjoy video essays a lot. Khadija and Bo, Shansbeer, Elliot Sang, Alexandra Avila. I really enjoy Matt Bernstein's Bit Fruity podcast. I watch all of those. I'm trying to think of who else. Oh, I'm like everyone else on the planet, it seems like recently. I've also been really enjoying Vanilla Mace. Her vlogs are now my go-to for a day where I don't want to think about awful things and just need something light-hearted and fun. Also, I would say the most enjoyable YouTube experience I've had in the last few years is from a channel which I think is pronounced Medusany. She did like a 4-hour plus long video about Desperate Housewives, which I can only assume was targeted at me personally, because an in-depth video about Desperate Housewives and the incel storyline, that was Eddie the serial killer. Incredible content. Okay, my alarm just went, which means I have a meeting in 5 minutes time. So I'm going to pause this video, do that meeting, and then I will be back to answer some more questions. So far, I think we've added 4 more loops to our chain. I don't know whether I should start another one or just keep adding to this one. I do like the idea of it being really obscenely long, and then if any of my friends ever want to get married in a barn, they could use it. Why do I have that specifically in mind? Friends, marry in a barn, please. Okay, I'm back and I have 5 more questions to answer. The next one being, who is my favourite artist? And this is another difficult question for me to answer, because even though I did study fine art, I can't say that I'm massively cultured when it comes to art. And actually I have like an idea in my head for a future video on this channel where I want to talk about why I don't really like art galleries, or more specifically why I find charity shops to be a more inspiring place than art galleries. And this of course doesn't mean that I don't like artists or like other artists' work. It just means that I'm really not tapped in to the contemporary art scene, up and coming artists, people that you should know. I don't really know any of that. A lot of the people who inspire me most are just randoms that come up on my home pages on social media, who I'm like, their work is fucking amazing. Case in point, there's an artist on Instagram whose handle is Ria Drawing. I'm sure lots of you will know her work because she does have quite a big account, and I think that her drawings are just incredible. The colours, the composition, everything about them entrances me. In terms of like well-known famous artists, I've written a list of people off the top of my head whose work I like, and that list is got Louise Bourgeois. I love her sculptural work and she had such a long illustrious career. There's kind of something in there for everyone. Tracy Emin is an artist whose work I really appreciate, and I think she's been unfairly heavily criticised in the past for her work, based mainly I think on misogyny and classism. I think she's been deliberately misunderstood in the mainstream. She's done lots of beautiful things. I love Grayson Perry. I really like Sarah Lucas, Joseph Beuys. I love Rothko's paintings, Francis Bacon. Those are the ones that I listed, but there are many more. There's also many completely unknown artists whose work I appreciate. And like I was saying, this idea of why charity shops are more inspiring to me than art galleries, because I'll just be in a charity shop looking through the frames or on eBay searching up paintings and filtering by condition used, and I see some of the most incredible work that's maybe got a signature, maybe not. It's been done by somebody at some point and I have no clue who. I also did quite a lot of research for my dissertation on outsider art, and I also was volunteering at a hospital in a psychiatric ward when I was also an outpatient at the same hospital for my own mental illness, and some of the work that the patients did in those classes I thought was incredible. So that's all just to say, who is my favourite artist? I don't really know. I like lots of you. Next, finally on to a question that I feel I can answer, and that's about my living room ceiling, which I have mentioned in at least one previous video. I did at one point paint green, and this was actually a very early on decision in my renovating process of this flat, and it was a good lesson to learn that just because something looks good on Pinterest, it doesn't mean it will look good in your space. When I first moved in, because the whole flat was in such a state, I was kind of renovating it room by room, and I ended up doing the living room first, and I had the idea in my head since before getting the keys for this flat that I was going to paint the ceiling of that room green. And that's specifically because I saw this photo on Pinterest and I thought it looked really beautiful. But having not ever lived in the flat at the point when I made this decision, there was plenty of things that I didn't know yet and really should have taken into consideration before I decided to make quite a bold and drastic choice. Because as I now know, that room is easily the darkest room in the flat. It doesn't get much light for the majority of the day, which means it's a lovely cool room, which I very much appreciate. appreciate in the summer, but it also means that having a dark green ceiling is really not the ideal choice for it. But at this time I hadn't figured that out yet, so I bought the green paint. I painted the ceiling with a ladder that was way too short, gave myself long-lasting neck pain, and lived with it for, I don't know, maybe a year. And then one day I was looking at it and I just thought, I fucked up, and I decided to paint over it white, and it looks much better. It's still a dark room and it always will be, but it's less of a dark room now without that dark ceiling. Also to note, painting over it was such a pig because it was a dark green, and again, I'm on a short ladder trying to paint a ceiling with loads of ridges in it. That means that you can't kind of do massive swipes with your roller. It's just a pain in the ass. I had to do 3 coats of the white over it, and honestly it could probably use another coat, but by the time I'd done 3 I just never wanted to paint that ceiling again, which is funny because I am actually currently considering whether or not to paint that ceiling again. I kind of got the crazy idea in my head that because of the squared shapes in the ceiling, it would be really interesting to do little individual different things on each of the panels, actual pictures and different blocks of colour and pattern. I kind of love the idea of it, but I also don't know if it will be worth the neck pain because there's a high probability that it wouldn't turn out good and I'd have to paint over it white again. Not sure, but if I do that, you will see it on this channel, so subscribe to find out. Right, next question is, if I could have a conversation with anyone alive or dead, who would it be? This is a very easy answer, and the answer is my gran. I often find myself wishing I could ask her questions that I never asked her, or tell her things about my life that I feel like she would be interested in, and it's really sad to me that I can't, but she had a long and happy life, so that's all that matters. And I don't know what else to say because I feel like I've brought the mood down now. So let's move on to the next question, and this one is also maybe another bleak one. How do I feel about the future of the planet and humanity / what do I do to not go completely insane? This one's tricky because I don't want to come on here and be really nihilistic and pessimistic and bum people out, but I also can't pretend that I feel particularly confident in the future of the planet and humanity. There are very real reasons why we should all be concerned, not even taking into consideration climate change, which honestly just feels like an insurmountable issue that I can sometimes barely look at, but just the rise of fascism and the fact that we are 2 years in to watching a live streamed genocide, and my government personally still seems to think that that's okay. It's really, really hard, as you say, to not go completely insane. I wish I had an answer for how not to do that on a consistent basis, because I'm currently in an ongoing cycle of some hope and optimism and then crashing despair, and I don't know how to get out of that loop. But what I can say for what makes things better is kind of twofold. Obviously, personal care is important. For me, that's very much tied into making things, being creative, and now sharing that on this channel. I have found those things to be really cathartic. And then also, more importantly, and this very much facilitates the being able to still be creative and make things, and that is being informed and being active politically and trying to do my bit for things. I've always had real issues around control and wanting to feel like everything is in my control, but when it comes to these huge issues and these horrendous human rights abuses, I obviously as an individual person have very, very little power over those situations, and that can and has at times had me feeling completely frozen and incapable of doing anything. When the genocide in Gaza began, I had a good couple of months of feeling like I was having a mental breakdown because I just couldn't comprehend the horrific nature of the things that I was seeing with the seeming apathy of so many people in day-to-day life. Those two things weren't computing, and it was making reality and my internal world feel really fractured and like I couldn't trust anyone. Then I got involved with my local Palestine solidarity group and started attending meetings, going to actions locally, helping to organise things and doing the things that I'm personally good at and capable of as part of this group, which also contains people who are really good at things that I couldn't do, like public speaking. I couldn't go to a demonstration and get on the mic and rally a crowd, but I can do the graphic design for the poster so that people know to show up in that location at that time. And once I realised that I had useful skills and I could do something practical to help out on this small level, it helped me feel a lot less crazy and a lot less alone. And also seeing all of the things that all of these other people were doing on a day-to-day basis, how much they cared, how engaged they were, was really inspiring and encouraged me to get more involved and see where I could help out. I would recommend that if you're feeling bleak about the future, about humanity, think about the things that you're good at, look for groups in your area that are doing things and go along to see if you can get involved. Obviously, I know some people have mobility issues, other disabilities, or reasons why they can't attend things in person, and there's a lot of organising that goes on online too, so hopefully you'll be able to find room in those spaces to also get involved. So yeah, that's how I manage in the face of a bleak world: creativity and activism. Final question: would I rather have penne for teeth or spaghetti for hair? And I would say the first and most important question in response to this is, are we talking cooked or uncooked pasta here? Because cooked penne for teeth is going to be a different story than dry. Although saying that, I think spaghetti for hair is definitely the preferred of those two in either scenario, because who wants a food item that's going to slowly rot in their mouth? As I have found, poor dental health leads to poor physical and otherwise health. Teeth are important. If you had spaghetti for hair, you would just break it all off, right? Or wear a hat. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, I don't really care what my hair looks like. So that's my answer. And that, I think, is the end of this Q&A. I'm going to see how well I can do in the cutting room editing this. I don't know whether it's been a complete shit show and none of my answers have made sense. If you've made it this far into this rambly mess, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being part of 10,000 subscribers. I feel very, very lucky that I've been able to grow this channel as much as I have, and that's thanks to all of you who watch. So please keep doing that, and I will speak to you soonish. Bye!